In San Diego, they call it the sunshine tax. Here in Hawaii, we call it the price of paradise. The expense that comes with living in such a beautiful place. Here are a couple of examples of this price of paradise. The national average for the cost of electricity is $103 a month. Here, the average is $222 a month. The national average for a single-family home is $349,000 a month. Here, the average is $665,000. That's the price of paradise. Back in 1992, Paul Brubaker, one of Hawaii's leading economists, put a concrete number on the price of paradise. He estimated that it cost almost 40% more to live in Hawaii than the mainland. Now today, he estimates that it costs 25% more. So I suppose that's good news. It's a lower percentage. But the bad news is that costs have risen across the board. For example, if you look at fixed costs, costs that are hard to cut back on, like housing, healthcare, and education, the average family now spends 75% of their income on these items, according to one recent book. And in 1973, the average family spent 50% of their income on these items. So that's a significant increase. Meanwhile, family incomes have fallen. For example, between 2001 and 2010, median income for Americans between the age of 45 and 54, their median income fell from $66,800 to $61,000. So we've got incomes falling, and we've got expenses rising. That's not a good formula. That is a formula for finances that are tight. And I know that for many of us, finances are tight. Many of us feel financially strapped. This morning, I want us to look at the story of a woman who was on the extreme edge financially. Someone who was experiencing a tighter time than all of us have probably ever experienced in our life. This woman, as we just read, was a widow living in a town called Zarephath. Now, this little town and its surrounding area was experiencing a drought. And I know, at least coming from Southern California, today a drought means you can't water your lawn as often as you'd like. But for this woman, in her time, a drought meant that literally people were dying. For them, water was life. And here in this drought-stricken town is this widow. We don't know much about her. The interesting thing is we never even know her name. But we know that she's at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. We know that she has no money and she has no husband. All she has is a young boy who is depending on her for his survival. Now God speaks to his prophet Elijah and sends him to this town with a promise. God says, "Go at once to Zarephath and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply food for you." Now I figure when Elijah hears this promise, he must have been thinking, sweet, a financially independent widow. Someone to take care of me. Maybe she has a jacuzzi, a home theater system. Can't wait to meet her. So Elijah goes to Zarephath. He sees a widow gathering some sticks, and he asks her for a drink of water. And remember, this is a time of drought, so that's no small request. So she heads off to get Elijah water, and as she's heading off, Elijah says, "Oh, and by the way, can you also bring me, a slice of bread, something to eat as well?" So when she hears that, she comes back. She walks back to him, and she says, "I don't have any bread. In fact, my kitchen is entirely bare, except for a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm out here gathering some sticks to take home to make a meal for me and my son that we may eat it and die." Now, I don't know if you've ever hit bottom financially, I don't know how desperate you've ever been, but this woman is literally on her last meal. The woman who's supposed to provide for Elijah is more desperate than him. Elijah says to her, "Do not be afraid. Go home as you were planning to do, but first make some bread and bring it to me. Then make some for yourself and for your son, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." Put yourself in this widow's shoes for a moment. You're on your way to go home and to eat your last meal. Do you dare believe this man? Do you dare to get your hopes up? Do you dare to do what he's telling you to do? Do you dare to give away what little you have rather than hold on to it for yourself and your son? When times are tight financially, what's our natural instinct? I know my natural instinct is to get self-protective and self-preoccupied. I'm so aware of my own needs that it's really hard to see the needs of others around me. When times are tight financially, our natural instinct is to hold on to what we've got rather than to share it. This widow has a decision to make. I think it's safe to say the most important decision of her life. And she decides to do what Elijah has told her. She goes home, pours out all of the flour she has, kneads it into a loaf, bakes it over a fire, and then takes it to Elijah. Sometimes in the church we talk about sacrificial giving. Not just giving from the extra that we have, but giving that hurts. Giving that's going to cost us something. This woman gives sacrificially. And then she goes home and she sits by her flour jar. She sits there wondering what's going to happen. Finally, she looks in the flour jar, and lo and behold, there is more flour. Not a 50-pound bag of flour, but enough for that day. The next day, once again, there's enough. The next day, once again, there's enough. And the next day, once again, there's enough. So there was food every day for Elijah and the woman and her family. The jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry. She gave what she had, and more was given to her. She gave what she had and received all that she needed. Blessing comes to those who give. That is the witness of Scripture. Proverbs 11:24 says, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty." In Luke 6:38, Jesus says, "Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Give, and it will be given to you. That's what this widow discovered. That's what God invites us to discover. Now, as I mentioned last week, that doesn't mean that if we give, we're going to get rich. If we give, we're not going to discover millions under our pillow. If we give, we're going to discover who God is. As John Ortberg puts it, if we give, we're going to meet the Lord of the flour jar. That's who God is. The Lord of the flour jar. The God of unending supply. The God we can't outgive. The God of abundance. But how does this abundance come to us? When we were living in San Diego, we redid the backyard where we lived. And as part of that, a dump truck came and dumped 10 yards of dirt in our alley. And it was like this mound of dirt that we had to shovel off. Now, if God had pulled up a dump truck and just dumped this mound of flour into this widow's kitchen, we would have looked at that and said, wow, now that's abundance. But that's not what happens, right? Instead, every single day, she receives enough flour for that day. Every single day, her small flour jar is restocked. Every single day, her needs are met. That's still abundance, right? Reminds me of a prayer Jesus taught. Give us this day our daily bread. Which reminds me of another prayer in the Bible. This one is from Proverbs 30. I'd like to show it to you. It goes like this. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. I love looking at this prayer because you never hear this prayer. How many times have you heard this prayer? How many times have you heard someone pray this prayer? Oh, the prayer of Jabez, or this prayer. This prayer you just don't hear. And I think this prayer sounds strange to us to say, Lord, don't give me too much money. Right? God, protect me from riches and poverty. And I think that sounds weird to us because 99% of us think that if we had more money, we would be happier. As Louis Lapham, the author of Money and Class in America, puts it, no matter what their income, a depressing number of Americans believe if they only had twice as much, they would inherit the estate of happiness promised them by the Declaration of Independence. We equate more money with happiness. But research shows that that's simply not the case. Studies repeatedly show that once your basic material needs are met, and that's a big once, but once your basic material needs are met, there is little or no correlation between wealth and well-being. According to the journal American Psychologist, the correlation between income and personal happiness is virtually negligible. Isn't that interesting? I know we don't believe that, but that's actually what research shows. David Myers is a leading researcher in this field. Here's how he concludes his major study on this topic. People who go to work in their overalls and on the bus are just as happy on average as those in suits who drive to work in their own Mercedes. That's interesting, right? Maybe Jesus and Proverbs are onto something. Maybe the key to happiness is having enough rather than having more than enough. Give us enough for today, God. That's what this widow receives. She discovers that God can be trusted to provide for her. She discovers that she doesn't have to worry about tomorrow's supply of flour. If we know that God will keep our flour jar from running empty, then we can experience financial freedom. Financial freedom. Isn't that what we want? Freedom from worry? Freedom from fear? Freedom from I've got to have more? Freedom from envy? Freedom from comparison? Freedom from guilt? Freedom from regret? The first step, not the only step, but the first step in discovering financial freedom is discovering that God is the Lord of the flour jar. That the God of abundance will provide for us each day all that we need as we trust Him. Now, I feel like I've experienced this in a lot of different ways throughout my life. I've seen God provide for me, provide for our family as I've trusted Him. And I'd like to share just a few ways that I've seen that in my own life. One way I've experienced that is through your generosity in coming here. It was a risk to come here, something we felt like God was calling us to do. It was an act of obedience to come here. We knew that it would be costly in some ways, My wife, Cindy, is a marriage and family therapist. She had a private practice in San Diego. Had to walk away from that. Had to get relicensed here. We knew that there's costs coming when you live in a new place, right? One of them I mentioned before is clothes, right? I didn't have any Aloha shirts. Let's get right down to the point. I found one, right, in our thrift store. My first one. Tommy Bahama. Thank you very much, God. And then someone from our church, a family from our church said, we have a lot of Aloha shirts that our son wore, he no longer is. Would you like some? And they just gave me this lineup. I think it was just an amazing act of generosity. Gave me about 10 Aloha shirts. So now, whenever I look in my closet, I just see this lineup of Aloha shirts. None that I purchased. And I say, the Lord of the flower jar provides. I've experienced that through your generosity. Here's another way I've experienced that in my life. Felt called to go to seminary. So did my wife. 2 of us in grad school, Fuller Seminary, School of Psychology, School of Theology. That was a risk. It was an act of obedience. Stepped into that, moved from Pennsylvania to LA to go to grad school, to go to seminary. Had to get a job. My friend said, you should apply for a job at IndyMac Bank in the IT department. Hello. I said, okay. So I applied for the job, the computer department. The person interviewed me and said, okay, you're hired. I said, great. What do I put down for the position I'll be doing? He said, write programmer analyst. And I remember thinking, I have no idea what that means. What is a programmer analyst? I was doing campus ministry. I'm like, programmer analyst, okay. So I start working in the computer department. And there's this program at IndyMac called Everyone's a Salesperson, where regardless of what department you're in, you can sign up a mortgage broker, and whatever business they do with IndyMac Bank, you get the commission as if you were a salesperson. So I sign up a mortgage broker, have no idea what I'm doing. Still don't know what happened. But I sign up this mortgage broker, and this broker just starts doing a ton of business with IndyMac Bank. Every month, at the month end, they have the Everyone's a Salesperson, top salesperson. For months, my broker just did way more than any other broker. It was so funny because when this was really going well, I was making more money from my Everyone's a Salesperson broker than my salary. More came in through that broker than my paycheck. So I was like, okay, the Lord of the flower jar, because I don't understand mortgage banking or computers, and I'm working here. So, but then, I was doing this to go to seminary, to become a pastor. And at one point, I realized I needed to take more classes, do more at Fuller Seminary, and cut back on my work hours. So I came to my boss and said, I want to cut back on my hours, but still work here. And he said, that's fine, but just so you know, you can't have your account, right? You can't have the Everyone's a Salesperson account if you cut back your hours. Oh! So, there was a part of me that hesitated for a minute because it was really going well. But I knew that's not what God was calling me to do. I knew that was God providing so that I could go to seminary and become a pastor. So I stepped down. They gave my account to just a salesperson who worked at the company. The minute that happened, for a number of different reasons, that broker stopped doing business with IndyMac and never did another deal again. And I just look at that and I think, the Lord of the flower jar provided for us. God provided for us. One more example. Up until 2007, I drove a 1992 Toyota Tercel. Tercel fans, let me hear it. Okay. All right. Olive green, 2-door Toyota Tercel. Yes? Classic. They don't make them like that anymore. So I drove that car up until 2007. And at the time, Cindy, my wife, was pregnant with our second son, with Daniel. And we kind of knew we needed a different car. We also knew that we didn't really have money for that. So every now and then I would kind of mention that to God, like, it's kind of a need we have, just FYI. And one day at church, a member named John came up and said to me, I want to buy you a new car. And I said, thank you for the offer, but that's not something I can accept. But John wouldn't let it go. Every now and then he would walk up to me and say, I want to buy you a new car. And every time I would say thanks, but no thanks. Now, this went on for several months, and during which time it became known that I was going to be leaving that church and being appointed to a different church and moving to a different city. So that's something that we were both, everyone in the church was aware of. But John still kept pressing his point. So one day we had lunch, and as we sat down in our booth, John basically turned to me and said, "There's some things that I need to do, and one of them is buy you a new car." And I really feel this is what God wants our family to do, and it's not for you, it's for your kids, and I want you to accept this gift. Now, he said this with such conviction that I was like, okay, I will actually pray about this. Because up till then, I was just like, it was just so lavish that I hadn't really prayed about it even, or talked to Cindy much about it. So we talked about it. We talked to some friends. We talked to our district superintendent at the time. And we decided to accept John's gift. So he was happy. He told me that his wife had been researching what she thought would be the best vehicle for us, and they thought the best vehicle would be the CRV, Honda CRV. It was right when they came out with the new model, right? Right? Because they used to have the tire in the back. This was the year they came out with that new model. The model, well, our car's out there. So, and the funny thing is, I don't know, I'm not into cars. But I do remember, before this even happened, looking up from the church, and there was a billboard, this is in LA, of the new CRV, and I remember thinking, that's a nice car, which I just never think. So he said, great. He said, these new CRVs, they're going quickly. So you got to be ready to meet me when I call you at a Honda dealer. I said, okay, I'll be ready. So about 2 weeks later, he calls me and says, can you meet me at Miller Honda in 2 hours? I say, okay. So I drive there in my Toyota Tercel, and, we decided to trade it in. It was initially valued at $100. I'm like, I drove it here. After some pretty serious bargaining, they gave us $200 for it. $200. As the keys were handed to me, I turned to John and said, I've never received a gift like this in my life. Thank you. And then I drove off in our new Honda CRV. God knew that we needed a different car. And the Lord of the flower jar provided for me and for our family, for our kids, in a way that I would never have imagined. Today is Consecration Sunday. And on this day, we're asking you to give your time and talents to God, to give your money to God, and most of all, to give yourself to God. And ultimately, giving is a risk. The risk we choose may be small or big, but until we take that risk, we will never know how safe it is to be in God's hands. For many of us, these are tight times financially. Given the price of paradise in particular, there are financial challenges and pressures that we face. But there's a God who is bigger than these challenges and pressures. He is the Lord of the flower jar, and He promises to provide for all who put their trust in Him. Amen?